April 15th, 1945. On this date, the British 11th Armored Division breached the perimeter of Bergen-Belsen. The soldiers prepared for a firefight. Instead, they stepped into a graveyard. The air was thick with a heavy physical stench. It smelled of burning rags and rotting meat. The newsreels record the reaction. In the footage, seasoned combat veterans vomit beside their tanks. They cover their noses with handkerchiefs. Tears stream down their faces. 10,000 corpses lay unburied across the camp. They blocked the dirt paths. They were piled against the wooden barracks. Survivors wandered among the dead, their ribs poked through gray skin. They did not speak. They only stared. But amidst this chaos, one man stood calm. Franz Hössler was there. He did not hide in the forests. He waited for the liberators with his hands behind his back. Why didn't he flee? The roads were open for hours, but Hössler believed he was untouchable. He thought he was simply an employee doing a job, at first glance, a former kitchen staffer, but in reality, a key architect of the Holocaust. Hössler started his career peeling potatoes. He ended it managing death factories. His transfer record lists the darkest names in history: Dachau, Auschwitz, Birkenau, finally Bergen-Belsen. He was not a desk murderer. He stood on the selection ramp. He looked into the faces of women and children. With a quick thumb gesture, he sent them to the gas. It got worse. He personally managed the crematoriums. When the ovens failed, he ordered the digging of open pits. He shot prisoners who moved too slowly. He beat those who fell. The camera captures him during the subsequent interrogation. He wears an SS uniform without insignia. His eyes are blank. He answers questions without hesitation or shame. This is the file on Franz Hössler. It tracks his path from the ladle to the noose. The world demanded payment for his crimes, and he paid with his life. February 4th, 1906. Franz Hössler was born on this date in the quiet town of Oberdorf. The setting was modest, typical Bavaria. Stone houses, narrow streets, a slow pace of life. Hössler received a basic education. He learned to read, write, and obey. But the Germany he grew up in was falling apart. Why did a simple man become a monster? It wasn't complex ideology, it was lack of opportunity. The Weimar Republic was a disaster. In the frame, images of the era show lines of unemployed men stretching for blocks. Money became worthless paper. Resentment boiled in the beer halls. Hössler saw no future in the chaos. He wanted a way out. 1932. Hössler made his choice. He signed the papers and joined the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. But political membership was not enough. That same year, he enlisted in the SS. At first glance, a political guard, but in reality, the regime's deadliest weapon. Hössler was not an intellectual. Files describe him as obedient, not brilliant. He didn't write manifestos, he followed orders. This trait made him perfect for the Totenkopfverbände, the Death's Head units. Their purpose was terror. 1933. Hössler arrived at Dachau. This was the model for all future concentration camps. His career didn't start with executions. It started in the kitchen. He worked as a camp cook. The contrast was sharp. Inside, he prepared meals. Outside, prisoners collapsed from hunger. But this was only the beginning. Hössler didn't stay behind the stove for long. He showed diligence. He followed every instruction, no matter how brutal. The camera records of the time show the SS troopers standing rigid, faces blank. Hössler fit this mold perfectly. His superiors noticed his willingness to inflict pain without hesitation. Events accelerated. He moved from menial tasks to direct repression. He absorbed the violence. He normalized it. By the time World War II broke out, Franz Hössler was no longer just a recruit from Oberdorf. He was a functioning gear in the machinery of extermination. He was ready for the horrors to come. June 1940. That was the date Franz Hössler stepped onto the grounds of Auschwitz. His name is now permanently burned into the history of the largest extermination camp. He arrived from Dachau with experience. Initially, he managed logistics and oversaw the kitchens, but the paperwork soon changed. Why did a kitchen supervisor become a mass murderer? It seemed like a simple shift in duties, but in reality, it was a test of total obedience. 1941 marked the turning point. Hossler organized Action 14F-13. This was not just administration, it was a death sentence for the sick. He walked through the barracks. He selected thousands of inmates deemed unfit for labor. Their destination was not a hospital, but a gas chamber. In October 1941, Hossler personally escorted 575 prisoners to Sonnenstein. He watched them board the trains. He ensured they never returned. Events accelerated. June 1942 brought a new level of violence. An uprising in the penal block failed. The reprisal was swift. 168 Polish prisoners were lined up against a wall. Hossler did not just issue the order, he stood on the firing line. Witnesses describe a terrifying scene. The shots rang out methodically. Hossler remained calm. He checked the bodies. He reloaded his weapon. To him, this was not slaughter. It was simply administration. But the regime needed to hide its crimes. From September to November 1942, Hossler took command of a special unit. It was called Sonderkommando Hossler. Their task was grim. They had to erase the past. Over 100,000 corpses lay in mass graves near Birkenau. Hossler ordered them exhumed. The historical record describes the scene: thick smoke rising from open pits. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Day and night, prisoners dragged rotting bodies to the pyres. They crushed bones into dust. Hossler watched every move. Anyone who paused for breath was beaten. Anyone who stumbled was shot on the spot. Ash covered the ground. August 1943. Hossler climbed the ladder again. He became the leader of the women's camp at Auschwitz II-Birkenau. His control was now absolute. Survivors recall his presence on the arrival ramp. Trains arrived at night. Searchlights cut through the darkness. Hossler stood at the selection point. With a simple gesture, he decided fates. Left to the barracks, right to the gas chambers. He frequently supervised the gassings himself, ensuring the doors were sealed tight. There was no turning back. The cruelty escalated. Dr. Johann Kremer recorded a specific incident in his diary. The gas chamber was full. The victims were screaming. One woman refused to enter the concrete bunker. She fought for her life. Hossler did not yell. He did not call for guards. He simply drew his pistol. He shot her in the head. The body fell. The doors closed. Kremer noted the chilling lack of emotion. There was no rage, just the cold execution of a task. This brutality became theatrical. Hossler enjoyed the power. Witnesses report that he mocked prisoners before their deaths. He played games with their hope. He promised extra rations. He promised safety. Then, minutes later, he sent them to the ovens. At first glance, a strict officer, but in reality, a sadist enjoying the torment. He was not a reluctant bureaucrat following orders. He was a zealot. He worked closely with Joseph Mengele and Joseph Kramer to improve the efficiency of death. He optimized the crematoriums. He streamlined the selections. By the end of 1944, the front line shifted. The rumble of Soviet artillery grew louder. The killing operations at Auschwitz began to wind down. Evidence was destroyed. Files were burned. But for Hossler, the war was not over. He packed his bags. He prepared for transfer. The job at Auschwitz was finished, but his capacity for violence remained. He moved on to new camps, ready to continue the slaughter elsewhere. Thus ended his time at the factory of death. January 1945. The Soviet artillery rumble grew louder every hour. The Red Army was closing the net around Auschwitz, but Franz Hössler did not stay to defend it. He packed his brutality and left. The SS launched a frantic evacuation. Tens of thousands of prisoners were forced out into the winter snow. The death marches began. Hössler's destination was Mittelbau-Dora in central Germany. This was not a standard camp. It was a subterranean factory. Deep inside the mountain, slave laborers built V-2 rockets for the dying Nazi war machine. The footage captures the scale. Endless dark tunnels carved into solid rock. Dampness dripped from the ceilings. Prisoners worked 18 hours a day without sunlight. The air smelled of chemicals and unwashed bodies. Food was almost non-existent. Beatings were constant. Why was Hössler sent here? He was an expert in breaking humans. He adapted instantly. His leadership style from Auschwitz found a new home in the tunnels. Men deemed too weak to lift heavy machinery were not fed. They were executed, or simply left to rot on the cold stone floor. Hössler supervised the selections personally. He watched, he pointed, he condemned. The systematic murder continued underground, but events accelerated. By early April 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. American tanks were approaching Mittelbau-Dora. The SS panicked. They could not allow the prisoners to be liberated. They could not let the witnesses speak. On April 5th, Hossler organized another evacuation. It was a forced march to Bergen-Belsen. The journey took 3 days. It was a procession of the dying. Hundreds fell along the road from exhaustion or starvation. Those who stumbled were shot in the back of the head. April 8th, the survivors arrived at Bergen-Belsen. Here, Hossler received a promotion. He became deputy commandant. His direct superior was Josef Kramer, the infamous Beast of Belsen. At first glance, a camp, but in reality, a graveyard waiting to be filled. Bergen-Belsen was a humanitarian catastrophe. The barracks were overcrowded. Typhus raged unchecked. There were no supplies. Piles of bodies blocked the walkways, a living hell. But this did not stop the killing. It accelerated it. Hossler did not try to improve conditions. Instead, he personally patrolled the camp with a pistol. He shot prisoners for minor infractions. He shot them for nothing at all. Accounts suggest his sadism spiked as the British Army drew closer. It was not panic. It was a desire to inflict maximum damage before the end. He squeezed every ounce of cruelty into his final moments of unchecked power. 1 week later, British forces breached the gates. They found a scene that would shock the world, and they found Hossler. He had not fled. He was waiting. When soldiers detained him, they discovered a bizarre layering of clothing. On the outside, he wore stolen prisoner rags, but underneath, he was still wearing his full SS uniform. The disguise failed. April 15th, 1945. On this date, the British tanks rolled through the gates of Bergen-Belsen. The soldiers expected a prison camp. They found a graveyard. What they saw defied logic. 60,000 prisoners wandered the grounds. They were skeletons wrapped in skin, barely clinging to consciousness. 10,000 unburied corpses lay in piles between the barracks. The air was thick. The smell of typhus, dysentery, and rotting flesh overwhelmed the troops. Seasoned war correspondents retched. Military personnel froze. They later described the scene as the absolute nadir of humanity. In the middle of this hellscape, Franz Hössler tried to vanish. He didn't just run. He stripped off his insignia. He stole the ragged striped uniform of a dead inmate. He blended into the shuffling crowd of victims, keeping his head down. Why did his plan fail? It seemed perfect, but arrogance destroyed him. British troops stopped him for a routine check. They patted him down. Beneath the stolen prisoner rags, they felt the stiff fabric of a military tunic. Hössler had made a fatal error. He was still wearing his full SS uniform underneath the disguise. The ruse collapsed instantly. Soldiers seized him. They dragged him out along with the rest of the command staff. Camp Commandant Josef Kramer was shackled. Female guards, including the notorious Irma Gress, were pulled from their quarters. But the British did not just arrest them, they put them to work. There was no turning back. In the days following liberation, the dynamic of power flipped. British troops forced the captured SS personnel, Hössler included, to clean up their own mess. The newsreel footage is grainy but clear. It shows SS officers standing in mass graves. They are not giving orders. They are dragging decomposing bodies by the ankles. At first glance, they look like common laborers, but in reality, they are mass murderers forced to confront their victims. Bulldozers pushed mounds of earth. When machines failed, Hössler and the others used their bare hands. They worked until they collapsed while British soldiers stood over them with rifles leveled. The arrogance of the SS was gone. Only fear remained. September 1945. The scene shifted to Lüneburg. Franz Hössler stood in the dock at the first Bergen-Belsen trial. This was a military tribunal. It was one of the first serious efforts to bring the Nazi machine to justice. 45 defendants faced the court. The charges were heavy: war crimes, murder, and participation in the extermination process. Hössler's file was among the darkest. Witness after witness took the stand. They looked him in the eye. One account silenced the room. Survivor Anita Lasker-Wallfisch described the selection ramp at Auschwitz. She identified Hössler. He was the man pointing women and children toward the gas chambers. It got worse. Others recalled his time at Bergen-Belsen. They described his active role in shootings. They spoke of the sound of his boots during beatings. They remembered his laughter as inmates died of thirst. Hössler attempted a defense. He claimed he was a small cog. He insisted he was merely following orders. He tried to portray himself as a low-ranking functionary caught in the machinery of war. The court rejected every word. The evidence was physical and documentary. His involvement spanned multiple camps. He managed extermination operations. He conducted selections. He was not a passive participant. He was an architect of horror. The trial gripped the world for weeks. It set the legal standard for the Nuremberg trials that followed. November 17, 1945, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Franz Hössler was found guilty on multiple counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The judge did not hesitate. His sentence was death. December 13, 1945. The final verdict was death. Franz Hössler sat in his cell at Hamelin prison, waiting for the end. This facility was not like the camps he once commanded. It was a fortress of cold stone and absolute silence. Unlike the chaotic mud and screaming of Bergen-Belsen, Hamelin operated with surgical precision. Order had returned. But this time, Hössler was not the one giving the orders. Why did he show no panic? He had spent years deciding who lived and who died. It seemed he accepted the reversal of roles. But in reality, there was simply nowhere left to run. The instrument of justice was a man named Albert Pierrepoint. He was the British Empire's most efficient hangman. He did not care about Nazi ideology. He cared about physics. He calculated drops, weights, and rope lengths to the millimeter. He prepared the gallows not with anger, but with professional detachment. There was no turning back. At first glance, a simple judicial procedure. But in reality, a dismantling of the master race myth. It was a mass operation. 13 war criminals were scheduled to die that single day. Pierrepoint moved quickly between the cells. He strapped their wrists. He placed the white hood. He adjusted the noose. The archives confirmed the logistics were flawless. There was no spectacle, no public audience, and no fanfare. Just the sound of heavy boots on the wooden platform. Hössler stood on the trapdoor. Witnesses looked for a sign of remorse. They waited for a confession or a plea for mercy. They got nothing. He remained cold. He faced the rope with the same icy indifference he had shown his thousands of victims. The lever was pulled. Pierrepoint executed 11 men and 3 women from the Belsen trials in total. It was hard physical labor, but for the survivors, it was a necessary weight. It wasn't about revenge. It was an acknowledgement that orders were no excuse. The era of impunity was over. The man who once played God hung limp at the end of a British rope. Justice had arrived. 5 distinct concentration camps. That was the professional resume of Franz Hössler. He was not a grand architect of the Holocaust. He was not a politician screaming from a podium in Berlin. He was a bureaucrat of death, at first glance, a mid-level officer with a clipboard. But in reality, the indispensable engine of the final solution. He did not write the laws. He executed them, literally. Hössler represented the terrifying middle management of the SS. He did not sit in a distant office. He stood on the selection ramp. He looked into the faces of the condemned. He pointed left or right. Why was he so valuable to the regime? Most men hesitated when faced with mass murder, but Hössler felt nothing. He transitioned seamlessly from one factory of death to another. Dachau, Auschwitz, Mittelbau-Dora, Bergen-Belsen. The names of the camps changed. The smell of burning bodies remained the same. The archival footage shows Hössler standing among his prisoners. His posture is relaxed. His uniform is immaculate. Behind him, emaciated figures struggle to stand. He does not look away. He looks bored. Witnesses at his trial painted a picture of absolute sadism. He didn't just oversee the process, he participated. When the trains arrived, he was there. When the gas chambers were sealed, he was watching. Events accelerated. As the Allies closed in, the cruelty escalated. He organized death marches through the freezing winter. The sound of crunching snow was punctuated by gunshots. If a prisoner fell, Hössler did not help them up. He pulled his service pistol. He ended their lives on the roadside and kept walking. There was no frenzy in his actions, no desperation. It was systematic work. But the collapse of the Third Reich brought him into the light. The British liberated Bergen-Belsen. They found thousands of unburied corpses, and they found Hössler. The Belsen Trial became a landmark. Hössler stood in the dock. He was calm. He claimed he was a soldier. He repeated the phrase that would become infamous. "I was just following orders." The judges did not accept it. The verdict made it clear. Obedience is not an excuse for genocide. The court saw past the uniform. They saw the man who loaded the trains and guarded the ovens. December 13th, 1945. On that day, the hangman did his job. The trapdoor opened. Hössler's neck snapped. Today, history books focus on Hitler or Himmler, but the system relied on the Franz Hösslers. Genocide is not magic. It is manual labor. It requires men to drive the trucks, men to lock the doors, men to pour the crystals. The story ends here. 3 major death camps marked his resume. Franz Hössler began his life in a small, unremarkable Bavarian town. He was a nobody with empty pockets, but the SS machine transformed him into a central figure of the extermination system. Why was he so effective? He possessed no grand political vision, but he had something far more dangerous: brutal practicality. Hössler treated murder as a logistical task. From Auschwitz to Mittelbau-Dora and finally to Bergen-Belsen, he did not merely follow orders, he executed them with a terrifying mixture of zeal and speed. But administrative work was not enough. Witnesses described the scene: Hössler standing on the selection ramp, his leather gloves pointing left or right. He sent women and children to the gas chambers without hesitation. He did not hide in an office. He personally shot prisoners. He stood by the ovens and supervised the cremation of tens of thousands of bodies. The smell of burning flesh was part of his daily routine. Survivors remembered his face. They remembered the sound of his voice. At first glance, a dutiful soldier following protocol, but in reality, a willing participant in mass slaughter. 1945 changed everything. The British captured him. The trial revealed the depth of his crimes. On December 13th, he faced the hangman. His execution brought a final stop to his career, but it could not undo the damage. Hössler remains a critical warning. He proved that mass atrocities require more than just evil leaders. They require men who look disturbingly normal, men who operate under uniform schedules and checklists. He was not the architect of the Holocaust. He was one of its engineers. The question remains: how much horror can one man inflict simply by choosing to obey?